The biggest problem the world will face in 20 years is population collapse. Not explosion, collapse.
More babies in the United States of America.
I want a baby boom.
All over the world, women are having fewer babies. 2/3 of countries are now no longer having enough children even to keep their populations stable. And it's not just the wealthy nations, even in the developing world, birth rates are declining. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? We'll ask our guests in just a moment.
We are living now in a very toxic environment.
Relationships and family life are actually becoming so much harder.
People want fewer children overall.
But first, here are the numbers behind the story.
For decades, the concern has been that the world is on course to become seriously overpopulated. Currently, there are 8.2 billion people on Earth, and while that number is still growing, when you dig into the numbers, it appears the world is actually witnessing an unprecedented collapse in birth rates, and some people are getting worried.
I can't emphasize this enough. There are not enough people. And I think one of the biggest risks to civilization is the low birth rate and the rapidly declining birth rate.
To keep populations from falling, the required rate is 2.1 children per woman. 2/3 of countries are already below that level. The UN predicts everywhere will be by 2100. Currently, the lowest levels can be seen in South Korea and Taiwan at just 1.12 and 1.11 births per woman respectively, with Japan at 1.40. Of the two most populous nations, China is at just 1.55 and India at 2.03. Europe's birth rate is 1.38, with Spain as low as 1.30, and the US is at 1.84. Africa is on average still well above replacement level at 4.0, but even that rate is falling fast. There is no definitive answer for why this is happening, but some of the theories include the prohibitive cost of having children, concerns about the economy or the environment, greater access to contraception for women, or couples prioritising their careers and own lives. Whatever the reason, there are consequences. If populations fall, the workforce will age, societies will no longer be able to support their pensions commitments, the cost of healthcare will rise, and cities will empty. On the other hand, demand for resources would fall, potentially helping the environment. For good or bad, this will reshape the world.
Well, let's bring in our guest now, and today I'm joined by Joyce Harper, Professor of Reproductive Science at University College London. Dr. Sophie Scott-Brown is an author and philosopher, and Dr. Jennifer Sciubba is a world-leading expert on demographic trends. Welcome to the programme, everybody. Dr. Harper, if I could start with you first of all, why do you think that birth rates are declining around the world?
There are several reasons for this, but one of the main reasons is that people are having children much later. The age that women are having, well, men and women are having children globally has been going up since we've been recording them. And for men, it's not so much of a problem. Men can father children, most men, till the day they die. But women have a limit on our fertile years. And for most women, our fertility will go down from our mid-30s. And for the vast majority of women, by age 45, we will be infertile and not be able to have a child naturally. So that's the biggest factor that's affecting this decrease in birth rates.
And Dr. Scott-Brown, why do you think people are putting it off?
Well, I think there are lots of reasons. I mean, economic, environmental disaster collapse, but I mean that is presuming, and Joyce's answer presumes that a lot of people are thinking this through and planning. Of course, a lot of children don't come across via planning, so I think there's a large issue to address around why relationships and family life are actually becoming so much harder. And of course, that's mostly in the developing world, the developed world. It's a very different story in other places too, which I think we should bear in mind.
Dr. Sciubba, does this declining birth rate hit all parts of society and all societies equally?
Not necessarily, but I also think we need to see the rising age at which people are having children as only part of the issue, because it's also that people want fewer children overall. And even if you look at a country like India, they have below replacement fertility rates in about 1/6 of the world's population, and yet the reason that fertility rates are low there are not because people are having children later. In fact, most women have completed their fertility by the time they get to their mid-20s. They're done childbearing. So it is a mix of factors, and people's desire for that it is a big driver of that. And so, to get to your question about does it hit everywhere equally? Well, what's remarkable is that 2 out of 3 people on the planet live somewhere with these below replacement, below 2 fertility rates. And so there is something in common among a huge swath of the globe. And there are still places, though, where it is above replacement level, still areas, particularly in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, where it's still relatively higher. So while it's a global trend, we do have a few exceptions, or perhaps we could say they're not going to be where the rest of the globe is today for a few more decades.
Jennifer, we're just looking now at a graphic that shows the top 10 countries with the lowest birth rates. I've noticed many of them, especially the top 3 or 4 or 5, are in East Asia. Why is that?
Well, the same reasons that happen everywhere. Part of it, though, that I think is really interesting when you look at East Asia is that there are these forces where women are deciding to opt out of traditional rites of passage into adulthood, like marriage and having children at all. So I think, although perfect gender equality, doesn't exist anywhere in the world, we do see some specific dynamics among some countries in East Asia with these underlying patriarchal systems that seem to be pressuring fertility rates even lower than they are in other areas of the world.
So, Dr. Scott-Brown, we have Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore. Skip over Ukraine because I think that's an anomaly right now. Then you have Hong Kong, all very wealthy East Asian countries. What's going on there?
Well, okay, I think we may be focusing a bit too much and sort of framing this as in some ways this is almost the fruit of a kind of progressive advance, that people are getting more choices, and when they have more choices, and it is a typical trend that we might find that they will choose to have less children, or they'll choose to control or plan their families much more. But I do think there's a larger kind of social phenomenon in terms of the extent of economic pressures that a lot of people are facing, and those pressures not just hitting the most poor and the most vulnerable, although of course they are, but actually what this is more revealing is the extent to which economic pressures are hitting the middle classes as well, which is going into informing sort of fertility or child or family rearing decisions. But then there's also the fact that we are just quite very, very literally in an unsafe environment for bringing up children.
Yes. Dr. Harper, are there biological, environmental, physical reasons for the decline in the birth rate?
Yeah, absolutely. We are living now in a very toxic environment, and every scientific conference I go to around fertility, we have talks about the pollutants that we call endocrine disruptors that are basically affecting our hormones, and they're everywhere. We all know about the microplastics, we know about ultra-processed food. So biologically, our environment's certainly not helping. We've heard about the financial reasons for people delaying childbirth, and there's all those pressures as well. But we're also seeing an increase in infertility. Part of that is because I've mentioned about having children later, but part of that's the environment. So all of these factors together and these pressures, and then we see celebrities and actresses and things having children in their 50s. That you hear one every week. And that gives people a false sense of security. So my work is very much based around reproductive health education. We want to be sure that everyone is fully aware about female fertility decline, and that it's real, and that to have a child past the age of even early 40s, certainly even using fertility treatment, becomes a very unusual and very expensive way of having a child. So I think it's really key now to understand all of this. We also have the stress of today's society is certainly not going to be helping fertility either. And some people decide not to have children. 50, 100 years ago, that was a rare occurrence. But now there's 20% of childless people in most countries, childless women. And for some of those, it would have been a choice. They decided they didn't want to have children. But again, the work we've done, we've asked even young people, and people do want children, and they do want 2 to 3 children, but that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing a fertility rate in many countries just hovering around 1, which I showed you in your graphic, and that's not what people want. If they want children, most of them are going to want 2 to 3 children.
Yeah. Jennifer, if I could ask you now, if we look at the other chart, the top 10 countries with the highest fertility rates, we're seeing that the top 10 are all in sub-Saharan Africa. Their rate is declining, but it's still much, much, much higher than anywhere else in the world. Do you know what accounts for that?
Yes. In some ways, there are leaders in some of these countries who actually see what's happening in other areas of the world with lower fertility rates. And some of them are actually questioning whether or not they want to set their countries on a path towards lower fertility rates. So we start to see a groundswell of that might perhaps pressure some disinvestment in family planning and reproductive health. That's going to be just a small piece of it. Maybe we're at the beginning of that. Could account for some of that stall, though. But we still have, widespread poverty, so lack of economic opportunity for women. They can't earn money outside the home, so that opportunity cost piece for having children is just not there. And education rates for women are still relatively lower. So it's the classic the reasons that fertility rates would be high. I have a question for Sophie, though, if I may be so bold. I would love to know a little bit more about the opinion about birth and safety, because I would think that statistically it's probably never been safer to give birth than it is right now. So I would just like to know a little bit more behind that answer.
Sure. Well, I think I wasn't. I think I was taking safety more broadly. I mean, the literal physical act of giving birth. I think you're completely right. I think this is absolutely, never has there been a better time, a safer time, more options, in fact, which is another important point of it. I think the safety comes in people's when they're sort of thinking about the future right now, and especially sort of that younger generation. I think have been more sensitive, more susceptible to this sort of future consciousness than ever before. I mean, there have been previous generations which it was just sort of a dim assumption that you'd have a future in which you could make choices and those choices would happen, and that the deal was you go in, you go into the workforce, you work hard, you get your sort of package deal, you can have your children. And that increasingly, that model that essentially was the product or the fruit of the welfare state, well, it was certainly in Britain or New Deal America, that's gone. But yet we're still really using the same structures, the same systems, and the same language that we inherited from that time to think about families, to think about population, and to all those mechanisms that help facilitate that. Whereas now I think a younger generation, they're actually physically safer to do this, but they're looking at a future not knowing, well, what kind of education my kids are going to have, what kind of jobs are they going to be for them, what sort of planet's going to be left for them, really big existential questions. And I think it's quite terrifying when it comes to family planning. It's also terrifying just in terms of forming relationships with one another. That's actually become so much harder to do now. So it's kind of hard to see.
Sophie, do you think all of those issues are intruding on young people's minds more because of social media?
I think that's a major factor. I think social media tends to get blamed for absolutely everything under the sun after a certain point. I do think that there are increasing, and what that does is it takes very intimate sort of questions or ideas, and it just pummels you with them constantly in a public sphere. I think it's an amazing source of pressure generation, but I would just not underestimate how fear-inducing the kind of world that we're living in right now. I mean, we are living in a situation.
But Sophie, Sophie, that's the distinction between reality and perception, isn't it? And I'm wondering, Dr. Joyce Harper, do you think that the constant feed of bad news from around the world and from inside your own country, climate anxiety, mass migration, illegal immigrants, and so on, lack of national identity, self-image, patriotism, all of these things are shifting and making people more anxious?
Yes, we've done research where we've asked both teenagers and adults if they want to have children, what factors would they take into consideration before they had them. And our environment and our social structure now is absolutely part of that. It is terrifying to lots of young people. They just don't know what would happen in the future. There's wars still going on. We're hearing about toxicity of chemicals and viruses and all these things all the time. So if people are in doubt or wondering, is now the right time? There's never a right time to have a baby. Very few people feel they have the right time to have a baby. We're always compromising.
So Joyce, just finally, your advice to women in a nutshell, if they want to have children?
If you want to have children, we really want women to, men as well, everyone to understand that female fertility decline is real. There is some myths on social media, but it does happen, and most people will start to lose their fertility from their mid-30s. So if you want children, you really need to start, I hate to say this, but it's true, in your early 30s.
Professor Joyce Harper, Sophie Scott-Brown, and Jennifer Sciubba, thank you all very much for your contributions today. Really appreciate that. Well, that's the view of the experts. Let's hear what people on the streets of London have to say about all this.
Why do you think people aren't having as many kids as they used to?
It's got to be the cost of living, I reckon.
Yeah.
I think, having a baby is very expensive.
I think cost of living and hope for the future.
Yeah. Do you think that's gone down in general?
I do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know, I think cost of living is a big thing. People don't have tons of disposable income, and it's very expensive to raise a child.
Yeah, people would focus on the career, and then I can live my own life with my own salary. So maybe that's why it's declining.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you think you'd want kids in the future? Is that something you still want? Or?
At my age, I kind of not really think about it as a priority, or else I would be rushing to get married.
It's too expensive, way too expensive. I mean, I fell pregnant with my daughter and completely not planned. We hadn't, trying to get on the mortgage rate and trying to, get a family house and everything. It's just not feasible. And then everyone goes, oh, I'm waiting until I can financially afford it. You can never afford to have a child.
It's a big issue from an economic standpoint. Clearly, we have an aging population. That's going to create a huge burden on the state that needs to be paid for somehow. Typically reliant on economic activity, the younger generation creating revenue for the state. If that isn't there, then that causes a problem. So I think government's got to do more to encourage people to have children, and there's got to be the opportunities for those kids to get into the workplace across a whole range of different industries and roles. So a lot to be done.
It's expensive, to have raising a child costs a lot of money.
Very true.
Yeah.
Do you think you want kids in the future?
Yeah, but I'm not 30s maybe. I need to.
Yeah, me definitely. I want a big family.
Yeah, but because if you have them sort of our age, young, it's just you can't really live your life properly. So I think just enjoy your life properly, get a job, get married, and then have kids when you're ready. Yeah.
When you're a bit more secure and when you had a bit of time to live your life, you don't want to be too young and dash into it. I want to be able to have a bit more life experience to pass on to my kids, so when I have them, I can guide them properly.
So many people choose to carry on with their career and then take a break and have a couple of years break, not really able to work properly full time, pursue your career.
Do you think you'll have more children?
I don't know. It's a struggle with one children for me because I don't have family, don't have grandparents near to us to have. Some parents here is lucky to have grandparents nearby, but we don't.
Well, one thing nobody mentioned there is the effect of artificial intelligence. Some experts believe that AI could be the biggest threat of all to global population, including our next guest, computer scientist, Professor Subhash Kak. He has a dire prediction and he joins us now. Professor Kak, how will artificial intelligence affect the global population?
Well, in two different ways. First of all, jobs are going to disappear, and they've already started to disappear. And so most families know that their children probably will not have jobs, and therefore they're not as keen to have children now as was the case in the past. Secondly, AI is changing our minds. Our brain gets rewired based on what we do. And since almost everybody is hooked on to social media and telephones literally the entire day, it's changing the way our mind works. And that is also contributing to a state where people don't want to have children. And so that's going to have an impact on the population.
Well, that sounds horrendous. Let's start with jobs, first of all. I noticed that in our Vox Pops, nobody mentioned the growth in artificial intelligence. Do you think that they are lagging behind reality and it's going to hit them soon, that the jobs will be scarce and the children will have nowhere to go?
Absolutely. In the 1820s, you had the Industrial Revolution when jobs disappeared in the rural parts of the world. But then people moved on to the cities because although the internal combustion engine replaced the brawn, we still needed people in the cities to take care of ledgers and all the decision making stuff. But now computers are also replacing the brain, not just the brawn, as in robots, but also the brain. And literally everything that we do, in literally every job that we do, computers can do it better, excepting perhaps in creative jobs, which are not as many as one would like them to be. And therefore, this is obviously going to have a huge impact on what will be there for people to do in companies or factories. You need fewer and fewer people to run factories now, for example. And rather than have 20 million professors all across the world, you can just have a few hundred in studios and they can teach everybody using the various media technologies that we have now.
And you mentioned neurological changes. Could you become a bit more specific about that?
Well, in the past, you needed humans to take decisions related to, well, what is better than what else. But now with AI, not only can AI have access, or does it not have access to all the information there is, as in large language models, the various platforms that we have, but it can take a more informed decision and therefore certainly better than what human agents can do.
But how does that bring down the birth rate? I mean, let's talk about, for example, people socializing. Does it affect that? Will it affect that negatively?
Of course, you already see it in countries like Japan or Korea, where a lot of young people are not interested in socializing at all. They are quite happy to be with their phones and with their social media networks. So people are um, learning or not learning how to socialize. They are perhaps more shy or they don't know how to interact. And then there are also, stuff on the internet which seems to satisfy the cravings that people have for interaction with other people, and people can also interact with others,
Right.
and with AI agents on the internet.
Professor, I think every parent can, affirm what you're saying, because you'll find that the population of the house is sort of atomized. Everyone goes into their small rooms, looks at their mobile phones, and that is enough to satisfy them. You're actually describing some sort of horrible dystopia in which people will become very unhappy. Is there anything that the state can and society can and should be doing to make sure this doesn't happen to humanity?
I think that's the big challenge of our times. As populations plummet, in fact, it's most likely that China's population, for example, by the end of this century, will be 1/4 of what it is now. And the same is happening in places like Europe and North America, and even India and elsewhere, excepting perhaps right now in sub-Saharan Africa. So the big challenge is, what should the state do, or what should the society do to make young people feel that life is worth living? This dystopia that you mentioned is a real danger. And now, to talk of one more thing about jobs, it's been estimated that about 50 to 60% of all the jobs in a developed society are transportation jobs. And we know that self-driving cars are literally there. And in fact, there are many cities in the US like Austin where self-driving service has already been launched by Tesla. So we can see the degree of danger that looms at the horizon.
So your predictions for the population of what? We're currently over 8 billion. Where do you think it will go?
Well, there is an institute in Vienna. Amongst its many scenarios is one where in 2300, the world population will be only 100 million. In other words, 1/80th of what it is now. Now, you might say, isn't that too extreme? Well, if the fertility rate is just above 1, right now it's 1.1 in Spain, 1.3 or 1.4 in Britain, at that rate, you need about 7 or 8 generations for population to fall to 1/80th or 1/50th to 1/80th. So 6 or 7 generations is 6 or 7 times 30, say about 200 years. So clearly, that's all in the realm of possibility.
Well, Professor Subhash, I'm sure that humankind will find a way, though, but thank you very much. Really appreciate that. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode again, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus, TRT World. Until next week, then, goodbye.